Welcome to our second set of recorded lectures. Today we're going to be talking about fluid and electrolyte balance. So we've been talking about the kidneys and urine production, but of course what's really important there is purifying the blood, cleaning the blood. And today we're going to tie the blood and the kidneys and a little bit of the endocrine system back together to talk about this balance, how we keep our blood in balance. And we're going to start off by talking about water balance. So water balance, like anything else that we're talking about in the body, we can look at the intake and the output. As long as these are balanced, that you're taking in the same amount that you're putting out, then that will stay in balance. You'll keep the same amount of water in your body. Now, for humans, our intake is mostly made up of things we drink. Obviously water itself, but also if you're drinking coffee or tea or soda or juice, that's also going to have a lot of water in it. There's also a lot of water in our food, and that's going to vary a lot depending on the food you're eating, but almost all food is going to have some water in it. Some food's going to have a lot more water, like fresh fruits and vegetables. Certain types of meats are going to have a higher water content. And then there's metabolic water. Metabolic water is water that we produce through metabolic reactions that are happening, like those dehydration reactions where we create proteins by putting together amino acids, and that creates a water. Now there's also output. So on the output side, there is output to feces. There's output to the expired air. So every time you breathe, you're losing some water to the air. And you'll particularly notice this, for example, if you have a cold or something and you're breathing through your mouth, you'll particularly notice that loss as it dries out your mouth and your throat. Your nose is better adapted to it, so you don't notice it as much, but you're still losing that water. Cutaneous transpiration, so that's water that is coming out of your skin, just normally, not sweat, but just evaporation from the skin. Then we've got sweat, and then finally we have urine. Now obviously there is water that goes into metabolic reactions as well as that comes out of metabolic reactions, but here we're just looking at the net effect, and the net effect of metabolic water is positive. So in order to keep this water in balance, we need to regulate water balance. And we can do this by responding to changes in blood concentration. So when your blood becomes more concentrated, when there's an increase in sodium, then that is going to stimulate the osmoreceptors. And those osmoreceptors are going to increase your thirst, so that's when you start to feel thirsty. And it's also going to increase the release of ADH, also called vasopressin, that we've talked about a couple of times already. ADH will decrease urinary water loss, and of course your increased thirst will hopefully cause you to go drink water and gain water that way. And then both of these lead to more water being present in the bloodstream, diluting the extracellular fluid and increasing the volume, restoring homeostasis, so you have a normal sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid. In addition, a decrease in water is not just going to result in a decrease in concentration, it's also going to, or an increase in concentration, is also going to result in a decrease in volume. So your body also responds separately to that decrease in volume, and that's through the baroreceptor reflex, which we talked about when we were looking at blood pressure and the heart. So if your body is in the normal range of blood pressure, everything is fine. But if your blood pressure rises above normal, which can happen for a lot of reasons, but one of them can just be a higher volume of blood. For example, if you just consumed a lot of water, that will stimulate the baroreceptors, which inhibits the cardioacceleratory centers, so decreasing cardiac output. inhibits the cardiac centers directly, so stimulating the cardioinhibitory centers, well, that's going to decrease cardiac output. Then you also have vasomotor centers inhibited, so that you get vasodilation, so the blood vessels themselves dilate. All of this is going to work to decrease blood pressure. On the other hand, if blood pressure falls below the normal range, that will inhibit the baroreceptors, which will then stimulate the vasomotor centers, causing vasoconstriction. It will stimulate the cardioacceleratory centers so that those start increasing cardiac output, and will inhibit the cardioinhibitory centers, preventing the decrease of cardiac output. So all of that will elevate blood pressure and restore homeostasis. So this doesn't matter here why your blood pressure has fallen below normal, but if it has, this is what's going to affect. If it falls below, this is what's going to happen if it goes above. And then we come back to this renin-angiotensin system. Now, we talked about a lot of this last time, so I'm not going to go over this in detail. If you're struggling with this, look back over the endocrine regulation lecture from last time. However, I do want to focus on ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide, sometimes called ANH, atrial natriuretic hormone. We've talked about this a little bit before, but this is coming back to how your body responds to elevated blood pressure. So with elevated blood pressure, it's going to stretch the atria of the heart, which then releases atrial natriuretic peptide. This will target the juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidney, which will cause renin release, which comes back to this whole renin-angiotensin system that we talked about before. And then that will result in, among other things, vasodilation, this will decrease renin release, so that results in vasodilation and drops the blood pressure. We also see inhibiting the collecting ducts of the kidneys from reabsorbing water and sodium, so that will decrease blood volume, which decreases blood pressure. We have targeting the baroreceptors, which inhibit the posterior pituitary's release of ADH, which again is going to inhibit the collecting ducts of the kidneys from reabsorbing water and sodium, and then that's going to decrease blood volume. And then we have the adrenal cortex, which is going to decrease its aldosterone release, which once again is going to come back to decreasing salt and water reabsorption in the kidneys. So a lot of these are going to wind up with changing the amount of salt and water reabsorption that's happening in the kidneys, because that is how we determine how much of that filtrate that comes out actually goes back into the bloodstream versus how much of it comes out in the urine. And then finally, we come back to this tubuloglomerular feedback loop, which again, we talked about before, but this is what's preventing us from peeing out lots of urine, losing lots for glomerular feedback rate anytime we have a blood pressure increase. So that helps us maintain the elevated blood pressure when we want it.